we go. Start recording. I'm muting all participants right now, so don't take offense. All right. Yeah. Or one.
Can we borrow a doormat from somewhere? Put it over the wires. A dorm, yeah, yeah. Let's go to the wires. I'm going to make sure they do this.
Whatever, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, we're good.
Nobody really should be touching it.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Since you're not using this thing, hey, you know what? Let's move that table out so it'll be an entrance where I'll move this one in.
Okay.
Let's do it for white.
Right.
Here.
Like this. Okay, you hear me? Do you hear me with the speaker? No? The speaker is not working, Avi.
I hear you.
Oh.
Rabbi, people sign up now with this.
Test.
Yeah. But people like conflict. I just think of the Google Form. I don't have to like it.
Okay.
No, there's no link in the WhatsApp.
Does everybody on Zoom hear me? Just thumbs up. A thumbs up? Good, excellent, perfect. Great.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure. Sports are awesome. I was. Oh, really? I felt like a CrossFit. Yeah. A Peloton coach. Oh, yeah. It's record today. Yeah. Hey.
We'll wait one more minute because actually some of the presenters are still coming. Check who registered and then send it out. Okay, good point. Hold on. Right, so let me just check. Ooh, you're right. 4 more. I have to send them the email. Okay, Shuli Levian, but I sent it. Everybody just give us a moment. We have to send out some more emails. Yeah, but it's not so simple.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
She just said to me she's coming a little late, so I'll change around the order. Okay. All right. Just a quick thumbs up from those on Zoom. So I see that if you hear me. Good. I see Juan. Good. Excellent. Wow. Very good. Excellent. Welcome. Okay. My name is Rabbi Shmuley Green, and welcome to the community-wide learning session in honor of the Shloshim of the passing of Rabbi Edison Steinsaltz. The idea today is basically to ask community members to share different ideas from different books of Rabbi Steinsaltz. And these community members have agreed to try to commit to learn from that book over the course of the next year with anybody who's interested in learning with them. So if you find something interesting, an idea or a notion or something that comes up from the book and you say, hey, I want to explore that further, or ideas such as that further, please reach out to me and I will get you in touch with the presenter if you don't know who exactly that presenter was, and they will be learning with you in some kind of consistent basis throughout the year from that particular book or any other book, but let's start from that book. A few thank yous are in order. I want to say, first of all, thank you to all the presenters, and I'll introduce them one by one when they get up. But I do want to say thank you to Michael Bieberman for helping me out tremendously with the technical aspects. Avi Meza, very much so. putting together the sound system and also being one of the presenters. And especially Rabbi Jaffe, who's on the Zoom, I think, also for calling me up and saying this has to happen or something has to happen. So he's the impetus. And I thank him for that. Before we go on to the actual presenters, each presenter is gonna present for around 3 to 5 minutes, 5 minutes, let's say, on an idea. We're gonna ask Rabbi Kaufman, who is the host, the rabbi of the host of this tent, of this parking lot, of this shul, of Orv Emet, to say just a few words so that we can get the program started. Thank you, Rabbi Kaufman. Wiping down the microphone after each.
You said about the noise.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Shmuley and Esther, for all that you do for our community. I just wanted to give words of welcome and also express on behalf of Vayevemes and my fellow rabbis in the community our deepest appreciation for this zikaron. It is so important that we give tribute to an individual of the stature of the great neshama, Rabbi Steinsaltz, and it's so critical that we do so. And there's a special schus that we have when people come together and they give tribute and they are misavel on such a tzaddik. As Chazal tell us, Kol hayerid demois al adam kosher moichlin kol avonaisav. That if you find it within your heart to recognize the loss of an adam kosher, of a pure neshama, of a person who was mezakeh the rabbim, as this tzaddik was, and if a person is moved to tears, Hashem Yisbarach takes those tears, and all of one's averis are wiped away. And that's why it's not just a good thing, it's absolutely essential thing, and a great schus that we have as a community to come together and to give tribute to Rav Steinsaltz. And I could tell you that there's no greater tribute than to read of his Devarim HaKadoshim, of all of Torah that he gave us, and the depth of his Torah, that this is the Chai Olam. And this is what Chazal say, that when they want to talk about the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, so how do they define it? Chazal and Perkei Avos say, Moshe Zocha Zikas Haravim. That Moshe merited to fulfill Torah himself, but even more than that, he was mezakeh. He benefited and he allowed for others to learn Torah. This is the godless of an individual who not only Zocha, fulfilled mitzvahs and Torah himself, but Zichas Haravim in such a great and a profound way. And that, I think, is what really stands for itself. And that, I think, becomes the great schus of all who are participating here personally and by Zoom, and all of those individuals. We are told that tzaddikim b'misosam kurim chayim. That tzaddikim, even in their passing, they are still alive. We understand it. Of course, it means that chayil not to b'sachenu. You're given the chayin netzach of Olam Haba, of Gan Eden, and all of what they've earned so richly. But I think what it really represents is that they are still alive in this world. Rav Steinsaltz leaves over so much of his Torah by writing and by the media, so that and by the people we will be hearing who are Talmidim, and most importantly, his Talmidim Muhakim. And we are so blessed to have Rabbi Shmuel and Mora Esther Green, who carry on. So Kareem Chaim. Steinsaltz is alive and well in Highland Park in Edison, and in our world. And Zechusa Yogin Aleinu, his chus be forever a source of inspiration and of chayim. So that this time was a chayim l'chayim, ofitz b'chayim. This time that we are all yearning for Hashem Yisbarach to grant all of us chayim. May that chayim be the chus that allows Yirtz Hashem, the Yeshua, the Lula, and the Yishmosai Tzura B'tzor HaChayim, and may his soul be bound in the bond of eternal life. Thank you so much again, Rabbi Shmuel.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Kaufman. Really appreciate those words. So without further ado, we have to change just a bit the order. You're going to go first. Okay. But I just want to, I've said this story many times to many people regarding the different books we're going to be exploring just a bit. One of the things Rabbi Steinsaltz told me, myself, and to his students, he told it with his little twinkle in his eye that you knew was trouble, always, when he had that twinkle in his eye and he looked at you. And he said, you know, there's around, to be a good Jew, he said, just to be a good Jew, to just start understanding what Judaism is, not to be a tzaddik, not to be a Talmid Chacham. Just to be a good Jew, you need to know around 100 books by heart. And then he said, you know, Shmuley, for you, I'll take it down to 40. You know what? I know you, Shmuley. 10, 4 books you need to know by heart just to understand what it means to be just to start getting what it means to be a Jew. So I said, what is it? And I was scared of asking that question because I knew there was going to be an answer. And he said, Tanakh, Shulchan Aruch, Shas, and Zohar. You know those by heart, he said, then you start understanding. So we'll start from here, and we'll ask Shlomo Lichtenstein to give us a 5-minute message on the book that he chose, Simple Words. Without further ado, Shlomo, so much.
I have a WhatsApp message from Shmuel that says 5 to 8 minutes, so it's proof that if I go over 5 minutes, I'm not just talking to him. So I chose the book in Simple Words because I hadn't read it, and when I opened it up, I found this little inscription in it. It says, "Gift from Abraham Bronner, June 2012." I think I inscribed that after he gave it to me after a few of the times, and I proceeded to forget about it. And then 8 years later, I picked it up. Those who know me and my trajectory as a Chozeh B'Teshuvah know that it's books that I forget about for 5 years and pick up and to cause trouble. So hopefully this won't be one of them. So we were asked to share ideas from Rabbi Steinsaltz's books. I find that to be a daunting task because as a trained lawyer, I look for needles in haystacks. But when you're trying to find a good idea for Rabbi Steinsaltz's books, it's refining gold from gold, and that's an entirely different endeavor. There's a background on this book, Simple Words. Words, as Rabbi Steinsaltz explains better, and I think that as a preface to everybody's speech, we should all be saying, you should read the book because we can't explain it better than Rabbi Steinsaltz. According to Rabbi Steinsaltz, words are a revelation of the soul, a distillation and sometimes distraction from our internal processes. They transform the hidden to the revealed, and as is the case with revelation in general, there's a shrinking process that occurs in the vernacular of the Kabbalah, Tzimtzum. As such, in Rabadin's words, quote, "The words that we use outwardly are only a part of those that are used internally." My main takeaway from the book is that to the extent that we do not completely comprehend ourselves or the words around us, we use words in a way that becomes incomprehensible. And because through our words, we tend to share our internal processes and ideas, if we muddle our words, particularly the simple words Rabbi Steinsaltz describes, there's a problematic backup. We end up with ideas and concepts that are themselves either incomprehensible or in need of serious rework. To the extent that we can refine our words and understand what we're saying and properly understand our speech, we can work backward to better comprehend how we've misapplied concepts and then rejuvenate the mistaken thought processes in order to better understand certain concepts and better articulate them. One chapter in particular that struck me is called Good Deeds. I think the title of this chapter, I don't know how it was translated because it's not about mitzvot, sorry, it's not about good deeds as you normally understand them. I think it was supposed to be a translation of the word mitzvot. But in any event, the chapter addresses a question that's commonly asked about mitzvot, particularly what some people think are small mitzvot. And Rabbi Dean phrases the question like this: do you think God really cares about these little details? Do you think God cares about what I do in my kitchen, my bedroom, or my office? Ultimately, Rabbi Dean writes that to answer this question, we have to realize that what we're doing when we ask it is we're superimposing our own limited conception of what is good upon God's will, and we're also superimposing upon God our own limited capacity to pay attention to what is important and what is too small to be worth noticing. Rabbi Dean notes that we grow up, many of us, with a kindergarten image of God, quote unquote, with a stick in one hand, a bag of candies in another. And as we grow up, we replace that image with the big boss, whose rewards and punishments differ only in magnitude from those doled out by our kindergarten God. I would venture to say that when we do that, it's a human image that we superimpose upon God. It is an idolatry of sorts. And at the end of the day, when we question why or if God cares about the details of our lives, how we deal with what Rabbi Dean says, use an example, the paper clips in our office, we cut God down to less than the capital E everything, and the capital E everywhere, and the capital A always, into a limited figurehead from whom we can try to hide. But we forget that because everything is an extension of God, if we are asking whether the infinite one has the capacity to concern himself with infinite details, we're kind of asking a non-starter type of question in the first place. And that's why Rabbi Dean writes, quote, the capacity to look down at details is a part of infinity. In fact, it is one of the definitions of being infinite. Just as nothing is too big for God, nothing is too small for God. I think Rabbi Dean's answer requires us to take a deeper look at ourselves. And if we find ourselves asking why or how God could possibly care about what we do or think or say, or what we prepare to do or think or to say, I think we have to realize that maybe we're cutting down not just God, but we're cutting down ourselves, because as the handiwork of God, if we're doubting the ability of God to care about the small things that we do in life, we're kind of setting ourselves up to fail to achieve our divinely inspired purpose. So to close, I guess two questions about the question in general. When people ask, why could God care about small details? When the question is asked by Torah observant Jews who supposedly adhere to a religious philosophy that requires dedication to an omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent God, perhaps the question is asked in a moment of frustration when detailed mitzvah observance is difficult. Is it really a question about God's power to care, or is it really a manifestation of a desire to escape from a God who cares? And when the question is asked by Jews who are not yet Torah observant, as a challenge to mitzvot observant in the first place, why could God care about this? Maybe the question is not why could God care about this, but why, maybe the question they're asking is, I have seen how small some Torah observance can be about these small things. How could such a great God desire to put in place a system that encourages such smallness? And to that extent, as Torah observant Jews, I think we have our work cut out for us to demonstrate that in terms of dedication to mitzvah performance, we can show how even the small things don't necessarily result in katnut. They result in a connection to the infinite one himself.
Thank you very much, Lomo. Thank you very much. I'm not going to go into introductions for everybody that's coming to speak and stuff like that. It'll take too long, but everybody is special, everybody's unique, and everybody had a unique, very special relationship with Rabbi Steinsaltz from this community. So we're very honored. Our next speaker is going to be Leslie. Okay, Leslie Ostring. Not going to make introductions because I'll sit here for another half an hour, but she's going to present an idea for 5 minutes on change and renewal. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Muli. It's a great privilege to come together today on this very special occasion of Rosh Steinsaltz Shloshim. It wasn't difficult to decide which of his works to choose to speak about, because really all of his works are timeless and appropriate to any context and any time of year. So I chose the Sefer Change and Renewal, which expounds sources, wisdom, and inspiration on Yom Tovim, our cycle of holidays and important times. The last chapters of the book concentrate on Elul, the Yomim Noarim, and Sukkot, and in that section, the Rav discusses personal and national, quote, reckoning, and what I believe is incredible insights into two related topics, soul searching and leadership. We each, I believe, have the potential for great leadership in our private and public lives. Leadership implies the action of guiding and helping to advance others, but really it begins, I think, within each of us, in our belief in ourselves and in our capacity to make a difference, first within and for ourselves, and then for and with others. And the reason I believe this is because I got this from the Rav. It starts in Elul, which the Rav refers to as a time of reckoning. He points out that self-reckoning or soul-searching is as ancient as the Jewish culture itself. Soul-searching, the Rav points out, starts with each individual, and here's the important part, and the part that absolutely captures the Rav's nature and why he and his Torah are so special. He stresses that when we're soul-searching, when we're contemplating the year and what our goals should be for the new year, don't only focus on our Aveirot. Don't only look at what we've done wrong, where we've come up short, and how we can and should improve all those things. Rather, implores the Rav, look at all of our mitzvot. Look at all the things we think we're doing right, and that's where we'll find a treasure chest of opportunity. Because according to the Rav, the status quo is the problem. Just when you think you're on the right path, right where you're supposed to be, that is where there's more opportunity. Where we need to focus our attention to make meaningful changes, improvements, where we need to do more. The message from the Rav, and this is the first insight, which I heard in person during many of my meetings with him is, you've never arrived. There's so much more to do, to be, to change, to accomplish, and to give. And it's not just a nice thing to do. It's really our responsibility. It's what he did, leading by example. And on that note, the second insight relates to leadership. As difficult as is personal soul searching, the Rav notes that communal soul searching and reckoning is even harder. It requires a, quote, interruption and halting of the ongoing processes, which is clearly very difficult with a whole community, not to mention a nation. And the Rav further notes that when an entire nation is headed for disaster, each individual is generally aware because everyone around him or her is in the same situation, and we're all swept along together. It's the leadership who in the Chumash are referred to as the, quote, eyes of the community in Bamidbar. Those are the ones who need to guide the nation and be the source of transformation. Quoting Tanit, the Rav says that a failure of the eyes of the community almost always causes a failure of the nation. Yehezkiel was defined as the, quote, watchman of the house, one who sees from afar. He's called the seer. In order for a nation to soul search, we need seers. We need leaders who the Rav says have, quote, the ability to feel and the power to think. So what was Rav Steinsaltz's leadership about? He led by example, doing and teaching. He was understanding and generous. He was critical, but constructively. Honest, but always kind. He went way out of his way to be there for hundreds of thousands of people. As a leader, he had the big picture in mind while tending as well to the daily, nightly, weekly, monthly, and annual details. So with tremendous gratitude to Hashem, I want to thank Rav Steinsaltz for having the ability, quote, ability to feel and the power to think. He was our eyes of the community. He changed the world, and as a very small aside, so meaningfully changed my life that there's really no way to define it. I also would like to acknowledge and thank my parents, Harriet and George Blank, who are the source of my connection to the Rav, because all great things come from greatness, for their incredible leadership, which is a daily gift to me, to our family, to our community, and to our nation. Also, thank you to the Rabbeim of this community for their enormous support, commitment, and leadership during calm and stormy times. A huge shout out to Esther and Shmuley Green for their leadership and dedication in bringing the Rav to our community. And to every single young man, each Mikor Chaim Steinsaltz ambassador, who came to this community and to other communities. You changed lives, many in ways you'll never know. And also, I'd like to acknowledge each of my children, Alex, Uri, Ayala, and Sigal, for their growing individual leadership. So I'll end with a quick note. I was writing back and forth with Rav Michal Falk, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Rav Steinsaltz, Hesder Yeshiva in Tekoa, which is an incredible institution and really worthy of our time and commitment and generosity, and they do amazing things in their building. Just at the end of last week, Rav Falk wrote to me, quote, now that Rav Steinsaltz is busy with other missions, I'm sure he isn't just resting. We all need to work even harder on our big mission of let our people know. So it's really incumbent upon each of us to look at all the opportunities to make adjustments and aspire to do more and be more, not only in what we're not doing or doing wrong, but also in our mitzvot. And all of this, of course, so meaningfully applies to myself as well, to create and build our leadership for ourselves, for our families, our community, and for our nation.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Very special words. Again, welcome to everybody on Zoom. I hope you can hear us. I see you can. Thank you so much. Our next presenter is going to be Kevin Friedman, who's going to present on the soul for around 5 to less minutes.
Shalom. The Soul by Rabbi Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz, Zechron Livracha, talks about, there's a couple of points that really caught my attention. One, as we know, the lower level of the soul, the nefesh, and the higher level of the neshama, the lower level nefesh dealing with our everyday physical needs, the neshama, the higher level, which is yearning to connect with the divine. But specifically, there's page 13, touches on a really very beautiful idea. The vehicle through which, quote, the vehicle through which our souls are manifest is usually an epiphany of some kind, beyond time, place, culture, or level of the soul. An epiphany can be thought of as a sudden insight of great importance that seems to come out of the blue, but not all epiphanies are the same. They differ in nature and effect from person to person. They can also vary and differ within the lifetime of a single person. So sometimes I like to think of the epiphany as the wake-up call. And for me, thank God we had, my daughter Madeline had limb lengthening surgery this summer where they lengthened her femur bone so far about 3.2 centimeters, and God willing, we're going for about 5.2 centimeters. The epiphany was living within a Kehillah Kedoshah, a holy community of people of all different backgrounds and faiths as their children rehabilitated. And sometimes I grapple with my own selfishness as we're in Elul, of when you're asking someone to help and to just help you because you need help with something. But what's incredible to see down there, and we're rehabbing it, this is Sinai Hospital of Baltimore, is to see the chesed of people helping someone else just for the sake of helping someone else, which is an incredible thing. And I think it taps in to your neshama, to your higher level, where you're not doing it to get something back, but you're doing it to help someone else. And Rabbi Steinsaltz goes on to quote that sometimes the garment, that the way to connect to our soul or get to meet our soul is through working on different midot. And so I'll close with this. I had the zechut really, and again, a yasher koach to really Esther and Shmuley and just for incredible work to bring the ambassadors here and really everyone in Israel and all the ambassadors. So again, I think we should do a kind of that. But Rabbi Steinsaltz said to me, he signed my book of 13 Petal Rose with the 2 words of Lilmod v'lasot, learn and do. And those 2 words have propelled me and inspired me. There are many times where I need a chizuk and I just open up and I reread just the 2 words and I see his handwriting. And, you know, so it's not enough. So we learn about something, and Rabbi Steinsaltz says in his book, The Soul, to try to connect with your midot, is the way to get to know your soul. And so we have tools out there to do Musar work, right? There's books. Everyday Holiness is a book that's sort of an entryway into doing work on Midot and getting involved in a Musar Vad. And so, and then of course, we're in the perfect laboratory of life, where we have plenty of opportunities to then work and journal on different Midot: Chesed, Gevura, kindness, strictness, and Tiferet, the combination of both. Shtikut, sometimes knowing when to stop talking, and I'm looking at Shmuley, and that's coming up for me. And so God willing, my blessing for all of us is that let's maybe really look at Musar and look at Midot as a way to really get to know our soul, and journal and do the work and join a Musar Vad. Amen.
Thank you, Kevin, so much. Wipe this down for a second, if you don't mind.
Moving right along.
It's here. We're going to ask Mark Stein to share a few words about the book that he chose, which is My Rebbe. Mark.
Wow, all these people on the screen here. Gosh. Can you hear me okay? So, initially when I chose this, I thought, this would be really easy. I'm just reading a book about the Rebbe, and, it's not so deep and esoteric, and so I wouldn't have to, sort of struggle with understanding the Rav Steinsaltz's complicated ideas about life. I could just tell over some stories about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and call it a day. But obviously, in a sense, right, this is Shloshim to commemorate Rabbi Steinsaltz. And so in reading this, what I was really trying to understand is, in looking at the Rebbe, and obviously Rabbi Steinsaltz is a wonderful person who influenced all of us in his own right. What did it say about him? And, clearly the Rebbe, as he was getting older, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that is, sort of came to appreciate some of his own limitations and his own mortality. And I think that's probably, like, to some extent, that's true of everybody, as we understand the way of the world. And so I think that Rabbi Steinsaltz, you wonder if on some level he was writing, he clearly absolutely adored the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And part of what makes the book so special is that in writing it, he writes in a really honest way. And by writing it, and I see, Rabbi Green shaking his head, by writing it in an honest way, that adoration comes out all the more because it winds up being real. And both, the beginning of the book talking about his early years, but later on, really, writing honestly about things like, did the Rebbe think that he was Mashiach? How did people relate to it? How did the movement go on after he passed? It was all written, as Rabbi Steinsaltz was probably so apt to do, as I've heard from Rabbi Green, in a very sort of honest way, but yet incredibly sensitive and thoughtful. And then, the real question becomes, to understand how Rabbi Steinsaltz would want, like, his Talmidim, the people here, to sort of go on without him, and how did he understand about Hasidus going on, and then beyond that, what levels can we take from our own life from these two, amazing people? And so, do I have a few more minutes here? What I want to do was to maybe just pick out a few passages, and then, beyond that, I'll just, my own life, when Rabbi Green asked me to do this, I'm really bad about reading books, and I love to read journal articles and newspapers, but there's like a whole book that I had to read, and so I personally am very grateful because a tribute must be a great tribute to two truly amazing tzaddikim that they actually got me to sit down and finish a whole book. So that in itself is quite remarkable. But I thought I would just read sort of one passage where the Rabbi Steinsaltz is describing the Rebbe, and then we can all think about exactly who he's describing. I think he thought that he was describing the Rebbe. We might think it differently. He says, so he's talking about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Ruach HaKodesh. People came to him with all sorts of different problems, and he would give answers. And he certainly opens to the idea that maybe that he just knew a whole lot. But then he sort of, spends a lot of the book describing how he spent, much more than I ever realized. The Lubavitcher Rebbe spent a lot of time at the grave of his father-in-law. Maybe Hasidim know this, but he spent hours and hours there, just reading through letters of the Hasidim and sort of trying to look inwards to himself. And just, he wouldn't daven mincha until he had gotten back from his father-in-law's kever. And he would spend, when he got older, he spent, even particularly after his wife passed away, more and more time there, and sort of trying to somehow almost like get in touch with a different world. And so Rabbi Steinsaltz, commenting on Ruach HaKodesh, says the following: Ruach HaKodesh reflects the intrinsic nature of the Rebbe's role. A Rebbe is like a magnifying glass. Beyond its capacity to enlarge, a magnifying glass also concentrates light. The sun's rays strike the glass, and if the glass is pure enough and correctly formed as a lens, the light rays can be focused at an even smaller point. When focused on flammable material, those light rays can produce fire. The sun alone cannot make fire. Because the lens creates the focus, it becomes a powerful tool. But it is important that the glass not be warped or compromised in any way. It has to be clean and transparent. A Rebbe functions as the same way as this lens. The devotion of his Hasidim is focused by him and in him. That is why he has special spiritual power. But like the magnifying glass, he has to be clean enough, that is, pure enough in mind and spirit, to fully accept the power that moves through him, and so to focus it spiritually. The power of a Rebbe is therefore not only a power from above or from beyond, it is also the power of his Hasidim in the aggregate. The combined strength and spiritual needs of those many existences, when concentrated on him, gives their representative a special power. The Rebbe stated more than on one occasion that a Rebbe's position, spiritual and physical, is based on the thoughts and behavior of his Hasidim. A Rebbe draws his power from the people and employs his power in turn for their care. So the Rebbe is like a magnifying glass, asking all of us to come together and then to be focused. And with that tremendous energy, we become purer and more honest. And in fact, his honesty then allows us to then become the greater people that we are, and to give us the focus to then move forward. I could read many more passages from the book, but I think that, Rabbi Steinsaltz, again, through the purity of his soul and all of his works, allows all of us to then go on and continue the learning like a great Rebbe. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Next presenter, I'll just give a quick story. I hope you guys don't mind, because my father, Olav Shalom, actually had a personal story with the Rebbe about Ruach HaKodesh. The Rebbe always used to ask my father, Olav Shalom, for reports of all the scientific work that he was doing. And my father didn't like doing that. It was annoying. So one time he saw the Rebbe in Crown Heights, and the Rebbe said to him, I asked you for some reports. So my father had a very unique relationship with the Rebbe, and he looked at him in frustration and said in frustration, and he said, Rebbe, they say you have Ruach HaKodesh. Don't you just know? So the Rebbe smiled at him with the twinkle in his eye, that twinkle, and he said, my father said, I'm sorry, the Hasidim say you have Ruach HaKodesh. So the Rebbe said to him, the Hasidim, let them say what they say. From you, I want reports. So without further ado, please, Dalia, thank you so much. Dalia Shepitz, thank you so much for presenting. Dalia will be presenting on Tales of Rav Nachman.
Once there was a king. He had 6 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter was very precious to him. So begins one of the tales entitled The Losing of the King's Daughter by Rav Nachman McBratzlow, retold by Rabbi Yadin Steinsaltz. The story continues. The king loved to play with his daughter, and one day he was annoyed with her and said, "May the evil one take you." In the morning, the king could not find his daughter. He was greatly distressed and sent his chamberlain and a servant to go and find her. In typical folktale fashion, the chamberlain travels and has many trials and tribulations. Eventually, he finds the king's daughter, who is now a queen in a castle. She instructs the chamberlain how to free her. Twice, he fails. Seemingly simple instructions. He must remain in a place for a year, yearn for her freedom, then he must fast and not sleep for 24 hours. The first time on his way to the castle, he sees an apple and eats it and falls into a deep sleep for many years. The second time he sees a spring that is red and has the scent of wine. He tastes it and immediately sleeps for 70 years. When he awakens, he learns that the king's daughter is no longer in the same castle. Now she is hidden away on a golden mountain in a castle of pearl. He travels for many years looking for her. In a desert, he sees a giant who's in charge of all the beasts. The giant berates him, calling him stupid, but he acquiesces to ask all the beasts about the whereabouts of the king's daughter. No luck. Then he agrees to ask his brother, also a giant, who's in charge of the birds. The giant denigrates him and he then calls the birds. Again, no luck. Finally, this giant suggests calling on his last brother, who is in charge of the winds. The brother tries to discourage the chamberlain, but then goes ahead and calls the wind. Then the giant becomes angry with the wind, where the wind did not immediately answer. The wind apologizes that he was late. He was busy transporting the daughter of a king to a castle of pearl on a golden mountain. The chamberlain finally succeeds in freeing the daughter of the king. This beautiful story is deceptively simple. Rabbi Nachman of Wrocław was the great-grandson of Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, also known as the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism. Rabbi Nachman, who was born in 1772 in the Ukraine, was brilliant and very spiritual. So why did Rabbi Steinsaltz, who is famous for his life work translating the Aramaic Babylonian Talmud into modern Hebrew so that Jewish learning could be facilitated around the world, why was he interested in retelling tales of Rabbi Nachman of Wrocław? Rabbi Steinsaltz recognized the importance and strength of Rabbi Nachman's storytelling, specifically its simplicity. He felt that a story can be moving and reach a lot more people than other methods of teaching. And even as one walks away, the effects remain, causing us to think about the story even days later. Both Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Steinsaltz felt that the many layers in a story appealed to people depending on their level of understanding. I chose to retell this story because we are now in Elul, and I feel that Rabbi Steinsaltz's life mission was to help Jews become closer to Hashem, to our God. In his commentary on the story, Rabbi Steinsaltz explained that the king is our divine ruler, the chamberlain and the faithful servant are spiritual leaders and the rest of the Jews. And the king's daughter is a complicated allusion to the Shekhinah. In the Kabbalistic interpretation, the Shekhinah is a motherly figure that represents God's presence on earth that suffers with the Israelites in exile. There are many references in the Bible and in Jewish literature to the Shekhinah, either as the bride of God, like in the Song of Songs, or the bride or the king's daughter, with the bridegroom being Israel, like in the Shabbat song, Lecha Dodi. Another explanation of the Shekhinah is that it is Knesset Yisrael, the collective soul of the Jewish people. Despite the fact that I have a hard time understanding the concept of Shekhinah, I can follow the parable in this story. The king, who is not mentioned after the first line, is our God. He has instructed us to come closer to him. We have been sleeping, like in the story. And what better time to wake up than now in Elul, when we hear the shofar entreating us to do teshuvah and return. We have fallen down and are tricked by our evil inclination to eat and drink and miss our opportunity for redemption. But there is hope. Even though we are thought by the outside world to be fools as we yearn and wait for the Mashiach, we know it will be true. I did not have the privilege of personally knowing Rabbi Steinsaltz, but our community has benefited greatly from his Talmidim, or students. Rabbi Shmuley and Esther Green guided the many Steinsaltz Makor Chaim ambassadors. The ambassadors taught us in ways exemplified by Rabbi Nachman, each to our own level, always starting with stories, songs, and melodies, awakening our souls to a higher level. They helped us understand the classic texts in their Chavruta style learning that happened at all hours of the day and night, and facilitated our Jewish philosophical thinking in their Chabarot. To all the ambassadors, we have not forgotten your lessons as they are enduring, and we thank you for raising our spirituality. To Rabbi Steinsaltz, thank you for sharing your legacy with us. Let us contemplate your mission in life and the symbolism of Rabbi Nachman's stories as we count the days to Rosh Hashanah. To the people of Israel, may we all have a Kativa Chatima Tova and be inscribed in the book of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Thank you very much. Now we're going to ask Mark Taransky to present the book that he chose, In the Beginning.
I'm kidding, it's fine. Rabbi Kaufman, thank you for having us and allowing us to use your facility, and to Shmuley and Esther, of course. The book that I am basing this brief discussion and reflection on by Rav Steinsaltz, as Shmuley said, is called In the Beginning, and the subtitle, Discourses on Hasidic Thought. As I was looking at my Sfarim to figure out what I was going to use, and Shmuley had already shared with me a number of the other books that people were going to use, this book jumped out at me for a number of different reasons. Firstly, the book was given to me by one of our community leaders who has already spoken this morning, Leslie, at a leadership event that I was privileged to attend. And that got me thinking about the Rav's leadership. The Rav, as we know, was a real leader, many times filling a void in leadership in our world. Leadership obviously takes bravery. And many times that means going against the flow and against the grain, which I guess, as it turned out, was something of a specialty for the Rav. He certainly didn't mind being that person. After the Shiva period concluded for the Rav, I was privileged to participate in a Zoom event organized by Shmuley and a number of his peers. And one of the Makor Chaim leaders gave a brief reflection about when the Rav was first writing his Shas that Dalia mentioned. He decided he was going to punctuate it and add the vowels to make it accessible for more and more people. And of course, a number of people thought this was outrageous. It was, almost heresy. And they would say to him, how can you do this? Goes against everything. And he would simply say, how many people are learning Gemara today? How many more people can learn Gemara now? How can that be a bad thing? It took leadership. And I know me personally have benefited tremendously from that original Shas, and now his new version as well. So I chose this book for two reasons. Actually, I focused on a chapter because I've read the book before. And the reason I chose this chapter really was for two reasons. The chapter was called Faith and Blessing. Talks about faith and tefillah and bracha. And so one reason I chose it was because, as I said earlier, to be a leader, you really need to have faith. And that's faith with a small f and with a capital F. When I was becoming more religious a long time ago back in England, I was listening to a shir by a Rabbi at Or Sameach, And this ties in with the whole point about faith and blessing. And a student of this Rebbe at a yeshiva started getting frustrated with tefillah, which I think all of us throughout our entire life can experience. And the student said, why am I repeating these words? The same words, day after day, time after time. Why can't I personalize it? So this Rebbe was a leader and said, fine, okay, to the whole class, for the next 3 days, put the siddur to the side, speak to God the way you want to speak to God. Shacharit, Mincha, Maariv. And it was at the end of the second day that the Talmidim came to their Rebbe and said, we're done. We can't do this. Like, we just can't find the words. We can't connect. And what Rav Steinsaltz talks about in this chapter about faith was that going back to the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, there was really no tefillah. There really were no brachot that the masses were reciting. And the question is asked, how is it possible? Because this started to happen in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. So the Rav asks, the Jews during the period of the first temple, how comes they got a pass on this? And the Rav brings down basically that at an individual level during the first Beit HaMikdash, people's faith was so ingrained in their being on every level that they really didn't need to go about and remember, I got to say this, I got to say that, I got to do it this time, because it was just Kol Hayom and Kol Halayla. They just simply lived a life of blessing and of faith. So, the second Beit HaMikdash period, the Knesset HaGedolah, the Great Assembly, they sat down and, as we know, they formalized the prayers that we generally recite today on every day in Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, as I was thinking about this reflectively, I'm just going to talk about myself and not our entire generation, of course, but I have to think, what does that mean? Like, I spend all day, the first thing you do when you wake up is you say Modeh Ani, and then you wash, and then we're saying brachot all day. We're davening a lot. And I literally can't imagine what it would have been like to live during the first Beit HaMikdash, because the world that we have today is so consumed with focusing on our need for faith and prayer. Explaining faith to someone can be extremely difficult because you have to have faith. And the Rav says that just the idea of faith is beyond the mental grasp of most human beings, most of our minds. In fact, he compares faith to a nameless fear that any one of us may have. You have that fear. You can't explain what it is to someone that doesn't understand that fear. It's the same thing as faith. Trying to explain it to someone who never found faith or hasn't got faith in life is very, very difficult. To a critical thinker, almost impossible, because faith is faith. If I'm a critical thinker, I want to take things apart, decompose them, touch them, see them. It's very difficult. And for me and myself, I am truly, truly grateful that I have faith in my life. And a good portion of that comes from learning from the Rav. The Hebrew word the Rav brings down for faith is emunah. And emunah has the same shoresh, the same root as emes, which is truth. So says the Rav, faith and truth are really, one can say, the same word, or at least derived from the same root. To believe is to recognize the truth of something, and to admit a truth is a matter of faith. What we consider truth is almost always a leap of faith at some point. I just want to conclude by saying that I also, this past week, I bought the Rav's Chumash. Having originally seen it at my good friend George Blank's house, I fell in love with it, and I only just this week was able to buy it. In this week's Parsha, in Ki Tavo that we read yesterday, there are 3 pasukim during the section about the brachot and the kolot. And the Rav's translation says, the Lord will release among you the curse, the confusion. The Lord will attach the pestilence and infectious plague to you until it eradicates you from upon the land. The Lord will smite you with consumption, with fever and inflammation and desiccation. So with that in mind, as we face this crazy world that we're in today, on Zoom with wipes and masks. I really want to encourage us to have faith, to focus on our prayer so that we can receive the bracha that are most appropriate for us at this time during Elul. Thank you.
Just a few more. Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate it. We're going to ask now Zach Subar to present on Rabbi Steinsaltz's discourses that are brought in his book, Talks on the Parsha.
Hi, everyone. So there's a Gemara in on Kesuvos, Yud Aleph, on the Aleph, which talks about a ger katan, a young convert. It says ger katan matfilin otel dat beiti. What does that mean? A young convert can be converted with the knowledge of the court, meaning he doesn't need his own consent to convert. There's a little discussion about it, but in the end, what's the reason for that? In the end, it says gadol de tam tam di surah. An adult has tasted the taste of prohibition. Aval katan zchut hu, but a young person, it's a merit to convert. That's why he doesn't need consent. She doesn't need consent. When I think about that sometimes, I've thought about that Gemara a lot as I've sort of been on my own journey, which we're all on. As I've taken on a little more in the last few years, I think about sort of that idea of the tam tam di surah, tasting prohibition. It's easy to remember that, those moments when you're about to go to bed and you realize you didn't daven Mariv and you have to get up and do it, or when you're at a wedding and all you can eat is cherry tomatoes, whatever it is for each of us, we all have those different things, So that's why, some of what I read in this book, Talks on the Parsha by Rabbi Steinsaltz, really spoke to me. In what I was reading, looking at, it's basically a collection of essays on the different parshas, every weekly parsha. And when he talks about Parshat Ve'etchanan, he says, on the whole, to be a Jew is difficult. That's how he begins a paragraph. Now that sounds like a radical idea to me. Not an idea I've heard so often, honestly. Almost something when I read it, I was like, can he even say that? And yet when I read it, I really felt like I was understood. It's something that where I saw that was written, I was understood. So why is it difficult to be a Jew? Or what is one reason why it's difficult to be a Jew? Rabbi Steinsaltz talks about because there are many contradictions within different psukim within the Torah. On one hand, we're supposed to love God. On the other hand, we're supposed to fear God. We're supposed to, do this, but then do that. There are so many things that one pasuk says this, one says that. So what is it? And that's one reason why Rabbi Steinsaltz brings that it's quote unquote challenging to be a Jew. He says people want one flag, one direction. And for that, they try to uproot a single isolated element from the Torah in order to simplify their world. They feel that they know what is important and the rest is commentary. So why do we have to live this life of contradiction? Can't I just live my life? Can I just do what I want? And yet, Rabbi Steinsaltz sees that to live life truly and to be a Jew, what it means to be a Jew is to accept, the fear and the love, everything together as one. And the challenge in that is what it means to be a Jew. And that's the most beautiful challenge you can have. He finishes off his talk in Ve'etchanan by saying, it is hard to be a Jew because Judaism requires of me to be at once extreme and moderate, calm and wild, to dance and to crawl. This is the complex nature of life that we must accept, even though the evil urge constantly knocks on the door, tempting us to reduce it all to one thing. So when I read that, I just feel so, Rabbi Steinsaltz has this unique way of really speaking to each and every one of us in our own way. And when I read that, I felt like he was speaking directly to me. And it was very meaningful. To be honest, I haven't read this. This is the second book I've read by Rabbi Steinsaltz. When you see all of the different wisdoms within Sfarim, you really see that he has so many little things in one place that just speak to each and every one of us. And that's really what I take from that. I also wanted to thank Rabbi Shmuley and Esther Green for really bringing so much of what Rabbi Steinsaltz has said to life for me, and looking forward to more. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. We have three more. Michael Garber is our next presenter. He's going to be talking about Talmudic images, the book that he chose.
Rashid Harav. Thank you, Shmuley and Esther, for inviting me here to speak tonight, this afternoon. I was working in a Turkish restaurant, and a woman came over to me, and she asked me, like so many people do, if I was Turkish. I guess it's the way I look. I don't know. I told her I wasn't Turkish, but my wife's grandparents happened to come from Çanakkale in Turkey. She looked at me in total shock. She said, "There are Turkish Jews?" I said, "Yep, we come in all flavors." I decided to learn the book written by Rabbi Steinsaltz entitled Talmudic Images, which provides short biographical insights into the Tanaim and Amoraim. I've been learning Sfarim written by Rabbi Steinsaltz for over 10 years. And based upon my learnings with Shmuley Green and others, I knew that what I was learning would be a straight, honest assessment of these men of historic brilliance to whom we owe so much. But I thought, if we were asked to build a perfect Talmudic image, Talmudic sage, we would think long, we would think hard about what training and characteristics we would desire this individual to have. Perhaps we make them rich and therefore less susceptible to worldly temptation and not be occupied by the mundane travails of life. Well, Shammai, a Beit Shammai thing, was either a builder or an architect. Shmuel was either an astrologer or a doctor. In either case, these people, in today's parlance, were professional people. Rabbi Elazar ben Harkinas was wealthy, but he separated himself from his family's money in order to study Torah. Yehuda Hanassi was also wealthy, and he too did not indulge in the worldly pleasures of money would have entitled him to. But the list of authors of the Gemara also included those people who were either poor or chose to work a minimum amount. These included Hillel, who was a woodcutter who only worked long enough to support himself, Rabbi Hoshua ben Hananiah, who was a poor blacksmith, and Rabbi, who was also poor. Maybe we would choose to make our Talmudic sage beautiful, to personify the beauty of Torah. This list, as set forth in the Gemara, would include Rabbi Elazar, who was tall and handsome, and Rav, who was good looking. Well, it wouldn't include Shmuel, who is described in the Gemara as neither short nor tall, but fat and with big teeth. It also wouldn't include Yehoshua ben Hananiah, who was also described as not tall and not handsome. We can look at our group of sages and the colleagues that they had throughout their lives. We would want somebody who was associated with people like themselves. Our list would include such luminaries as Hillel and Shammai, who, although they had strong fundamental differences and were rivals in Torah, they were friends. And Eliezer, who was a Talmud in the Beit Shammai camp, and Yehoshua, who adhered to the thinkings and philosophy of Hillel, grew up together and were students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and were friends. But it might not include Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who had a terrible disagreement that had tragic consequences in the end. We would want to keep our Talmudic sage insulated from the outside world so they can concentrate solely and exclusively on the Limudei Kodesh. If that was our decision, we wouldn't include Tanaim and Amorim like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Hillel Hanassi, Yehuda Hanassi, about whom the Gemara says, not since Moshe was there a person who controlled politics and Torah like him. It also wouldn't include Rav Ashi, who was the leader of the entire Jewish world and was very knowledgeable about secular studies. It also would include Reish Lakish, who went from the secular world and from the scholarly world to become a gladiator, probably not associated with a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, and subsequently went back and became a scholar once again in this mask. It's a different time we're living in. We would want authors to come from families that strictly adhere to Torah and mitzvos. In other words, we'd look at the Chachamim's yichus, perhaps. If one examines the yichus of some of the Rabbeim in Reb Steinsaltz's books, we find Tanaim and Amoraim who were descendants of David HaMelech. But we also find Abaya, who was a descendant of Eli the Kohen, and Rabbi Elazar, whose family was not particularly interested in Torah scholarship. We might want to choose a Talmudic sage who has a certain philosophical bent. Yet we see from the time of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel that Talmudic sages had different philosophies. Beit Shammai said the Torah must be kept exactly and without any concern of the circumstances of human nature. Hillel disagreed and said the human condition must be kept in mind when making halachic rulings. In fact, this basic disagreement lasted for generations and perhaps even exists today. So we see that there are Tanaim and Amoraim who are rich. There are Tanaim and Amoraim who are good looking, others who were not so good looking. There were Tanaim and Amoraim who were friends, others who were not friends. Some were insular in the Judaic world, and some were leaders of Bnei Yisrael in relationships with the secular society of the time. We know that Mishnah and Gemara are not compendiums of the history of the Jews from slightly before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash till about 500 years later. Yet that is the time and period that the Mishnah and Gemara were written in. We know that it's not a sefer of laws and rules, yet it contains laws and rules. Why does the Gemara tell us the history? And why does it tell us the economic or social status of these Tanaim and Amoraim? What are we to conclude is the purpose of Mishnah and Gemara? The purpose of the Gemara, as told us by none other than Rabbi Ashi, said that it wants to demonstrate to us the giving, the learning process, the asking and answering of questions. He wanted us to understand that the questions and answer dialogue is the foundation of our very being as Jewish people. The process is what mattered. He wanted to demonstrate the process and how decisions were arrived at and what obstacles and problems were overcome along the way. Rav Ashi had to also ensure that the questions and answers would serve as well-defined, accurate material from which it would be possible to draw practical conclusions into the future. What did Rabbi Steinsaltz, a great Rav, the builder of yeshivot, write this book? Why did he write it? Rabbi Steinsaltz was ultimately a teacher. And what he was trying to teach us by giving us these short biographies of these 13 great Tanaim and Amoraim is it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're good looking or not. It doesn't matter if you're involved in a secular world or not. You can potentially be a great Rav and instill knowledge in a generation of Jews. Rabbi Steinsaltz teaches us that we can all be the link in the chain. Tanaim and Amoraim, and in fact, all Jews come in different flavors.
Thank you so much, Michael. We're nearing the end. Very quick, very soon. Two more people, special people. Avi, Meza, please, you chose biblical images to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Shmuley. This is Rabbi Kaufman. And thank you again for the special honor to remember the great Rabbi Steinsaltz, a true Gadol B'Yisrael, who made Torah education so accessible to so many. Aside from basic familiarity of Rabbi Steinsaltz's early works, such as famous Gemaras that he published,
and which would find their way into my father's personal library, Rabbi Mesa, when I was a kid. I would try to use them until I found the Sansino, which had English, it was a little easier. I really didn't know much about the great rabbi until about 10 years ago, when our good friend Leslie Ostrin asked me if I was interested in hosting, which meant basically they'd take me over my house for a year. And I remember a discussion I had with Leslie, and she said, don't worry, you will gain more out of this than what you think they will be in trouble from. Leslie, you're so wrong. These guys were amazing. And what happened was we had the distinct pleasure of 4 ambassadors, Avner Segal, Avner Branner, Amichai Bauer, and Ori Keller, all special and unique personalities. And they introduced our family to many memorable experiences, most of which we look back with fondness. As part of Shloshim, I took on the review of Biblical Images, this particular book. And this is a classic work. And one of the chapters deals with Yehoshua, the great, student, as most people know, a disciple of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the rabbi talks about him actually in an interesting way, because the most famous, when you think of Yehoshua in Tanakh, you think of him sitting at the foot of Har Sinai. And by the Egel Azav, when most of Klal Yisrael abandoned God for idolatry, Yehoshua waited faithfully, believing that Moshe would descend. And Moshe did, and we have a famous discussion. What is the voice that we hear from the camp? Kol Anot, is it Nechama? No, but Yehoshua was there when he needed it. And what the rabbi says is, and I read, to be sure, the pairing of Moses and Joshua is not straightforward and simple. The relation between them goes beyond that of master and pupil. The disciple was indisputably superior in at least one respect. And while the teacher was the sole creator of the theory and builder of foundation, the pupil was the one who established it firmly and concluded the task. In other words, while Moshe had the vision of entering Eretz Yisrael and leading out Bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim, he needed Yehoshua to implement that vision, to fulfill that vision, because without Yehoshua, Moshe's ideals cannot become reality. So there was a certain connection between Moshe and Yehoshua, and the rabbi quotes the famous Gemara in Baba Basra, and I'll say it in English: the face of Moshe is like the sun, the face of Yehoshua like the moon. The greatness of two are depicted together, but whereas the one is the great source of light, the other is a reflection. So it was not that they were distinct, they each had their part, but they complemented each other. When hosting the Steinsaltz ambassadors, they impressed me with several key traits. And this is reflected also in their leader, their fearless leader, Rabbi Shmuley Green. First of all, nobody has more simchas achayim than Steinsaltz ambassadors. The positivity and optimism that they reflect is contagious. The second thing is the can-do attitude. There is nothing that a Steinsaltz disciple or ambassador cannot figure out how to do. Even if they don't know what they're doing, they have to do. My favorite story is when they went skiing. They never went skiing. They went down Black Diamond. They came back with a dislocated shoulder. But I guess they tried. The most significantly, though, was their reverence for Rabbi Steinsaltz and the nobility of his mission of making Torah accessible and enjoyable to all. Similar to the rabbi, they were able to take his message and embody that and spread it with our community and all over. So as we remember the great Rabbi Steinsaltz and all of his wonderful accomplishments, I believe it's fair to say that through his great works, he has helped so many in Klal Yisrael fulfill the words we say nightly in our Ma'ariv prayers. V'nismach v'divrei Torah secha u'v'mitzvah secha l'yoyvam b'orah. We will rejoice in the words of thy Torah and in thy commandments forever. Because the simcha of Yiddishkeit was the essence that I experienced from being in touch with his Yeshuas, his disciples. So as we mourn the great loss of Rabbi Steinsaltz, let's be inspired, and remain hopeful in the perpetuation of his great teachings and legacy from all those who benefit from his great works and all those he mentored and continue to spread his ideals and wonderful Torah. May the Neshama Rabbi Steinsaltz be of blessed memory, and may in his chus we all have a ksiva chasima temple. Amen.
Okay, our last presenter so generously gave of his time and ability and chose one of the seminal books of Rabbi Steinsaltz, their 13-petaled rose. Ben Madsen, thank you for taking this upon yourself. And these last few words will come from Ben. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give such a big thank you to Rabbi Shloshim and his wife, Esther Green, because this has been a wonderful year of learning for me. Simchas Torah last year, there was this crazy guy with a massive beard singing in Russian, shirt untucked, and I said, "You look vaguely Chabad. Maybe you could teach me Yiddish." And he said, "I can't teach you Yiddish, but we can learn Torah together." So he invited me to learn this Chabura Shabbos morning, which has been absolutely the biggest uplift. And now I bring my kids, and they splash mud, and nobody seems to care, which is I really appreciate that. And so since I've started keeping a little list of quotes that Rabbi Green would say, I think about them during Shabbos and then write them down after Shabbos, and I noticed that all of them are from Rosh Hashanah, and they're always usually kind of wild stories or things that were just kind of out of the ordinary. So I figured I should maybe start learning this Torah. So I just wanted to, the 13-petal rose is famously a very challenging read, especially in the beginning. You just jump right in with talking about the worlds and the angels and all these challenging things. So I figured I would speak about the publisher next. I wanted to speak about one of the later chapters on Shiva. So I wanted to point out that in every time travel movie, they do two things. Number one, they always do that lame joke of like, it's not just where are we, but when are we, which is a classic time travel joke. And then the other thing they do is they're always very careful when they go back in time not to change too much because it will change everything in the future. And another one of my rabbis a couple of years ago pointed out that if that's what they're doing when they're going back in time, trying not to change too much because it will change the future, then how much more so do we right now have to recognize that even the little things we do can change the future in such a massive way. So that's a very inspiring thing, and you can kind of close with that. But if you're a Steinsaltz, you ask the further question. What do you mean? That's not exactly how time works. It's not like everything, we don't have this bias where if everything's negative, if things are negative, then we're headed towards degeneration and the end of society. And if something's positive, it's just going to stay positive forever. And the Steinsaltz kind of asks a question on that and points out that even small things that happened in the past, they don't necessarily mean that something horrible is going to happen. There's something terrible, something small changes in the past that's negative, and something horrible is going to happen in the future. It points out that's not exactly how it's going to create the world. And the reason we know that that's not how it's going to create the world is because it's going to create a people before the world. It's going to create the ability to change the past before we created the concept of time and the concept of the physical world. And that's what I find so interesting in general about the Torah of Steinsaltz, is that he always asks one question further. And the nice thing, the nice inspiring thought that you think you had, he goes, okay, so what's that mean? And this is, I've never run for Steinsaltz, but I've run from his community. He goes, this to me, all things like I come up with the idea, and I sit there kind of impressed with myself. And she was like, not in a negative way, but like, let's go one step further. And that's something that I really value in that relationship. And so he says specifically that we often associate Shiva with talking of the chest and owl and thinking about and thinking about what we've done wrong, by the way, I was trying to think at a level, she said, last year about what we've done right and going further on that. But just in the general sense of treatment, we usually associate it with like, what have I done wrong, how can I extend myself back towards the reproduction. But according to Steinsaltz's book here, the 13th he points out that the big finish of Shiva is that time isn't linear. That's the real finish. And like you the entire idea of Shiva, not just on feeling bad and moping around for all the whole month of September, but the idea that time is not a linear thing that remains unchanged. So this says, man can extricate himself from the body and live his life. And the change of personality that otherwise compels to follow a path of no return. So going back to those anti-our movies, you have this idea that a small thing in the past can become a massive thing in the future. And interestingly, although that would be a logical thing to assume, that's the whole process of Torah, is that you take a logical thing to assume, you put one step past it, and you find something more beautiful and more deep, and that actually means something much more about our capabilities in life. And so I think it's just an interesting thing. There's so much secular wisdom about this specific idea. And one quote that I love is Sarah Figure, where it said that life can only be understood backwards, it has to be lived forwards. And so how do we live this idea forwards? How do we start to change our perception that things that happened in the past come to the past? And the idea that the Steinsaltz goes into about being Shiva is also, and it's interesting, he doesn't show the sources, so we're going to have to get think about it a little bit, but I think it's really fine. He points out that he said, everything up to my life, everything in my life up to this point is not related to me. This is not Shiva. Chronologically or historically, it may be part of you. So you're not letting off the hook. He's not saying you can't, you still need to go apologize, but you're dissociating from life. And I no longer accepted this stuff. With a new goal in life, a person assumes a new identity. So I just think it's such a beautiful way to enter into this time and to honor a person who brought so much Torah into the world in such an accessible way. And one of the reasons he did put all those footnotes and fill everything out with quotes is because he wanted things to be accessible to the common reader. So I think that's going into the panel with this idea that everything, every question you come to, ask one step further, number one, and then number two, use Shiva to break this linearity of time, this deterministic viewpoint, and as he said, shape through the past, transfigure ourselves and thrust eagerly forward into a new identity, an action that breaks the bonds technology and history of our cognitive matrixy biases.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everyone. We're going to conclude right now. Thank you, everyone. We're actually basically on time. Just a concluding thought. So a good friend of mine, Rav Pini Alush, who's a rabbi in Arizona, he says always this story over, and it's true. And he asked Rabbi Steinsaltz once, what's the most important question that one should ask himself or herself? And Rabbi Steinsaltz said, Asma. So now, what? Always, Asma. Now what? So we did this nice thing. Rabbi Steinsaltz, I'm sure, is looking down with nachas, but everyone has to ask themselves, especially during this time, exactly like Leslie was saying, and Ben and everybody, now what? Now what? So I strongly, strongly encourage you to ask the questions, to learn with the presenters, the books that they found interesting, to learn with others, anything and everything. Get to those 4 books by heart, start working on it. It starts with one step. And be part of the conversation. Be part of the conversation, part of the questions, part of the process. And we all have a very sweet year. Thank you so much for all this. So join on Zoom. And everybody said, Shana Tova. Thank you so much.
Very good. Very good. I'm just getting this. Just getting this.